So, just a little preamble here. I never aspired to become a residential real estate developer, but I felt it was urgent for me to do this, and you'll see why. So my background is actually from New York originally, born and raised in Manhattan. Woo! And I became a video game designer and video game developer and moved out to the West Coast and was imagining worlds that made sense. And at the dot-com crash of 2000, I was living up in Marin County, was doing a lot of work with some folks from Lucas, and it was a really fantastic time. But I had friends who had organic biodynamic farms, farm to table, and I had no idea what that was. What is organic? I thought everything was organic. And then I went and I spent some time with them, and I got inspired, and I started to film these case studies about organic family farms, which led eventually to a national public television cooking show. Originally it was called Organic Living, and then we changed the name to Hippie Gourmet. A little edgier, but less sponsors. But in any case, we went national. We reached 35 million homes a week on national public television, but it was so impactful, so deeply inspirational for me to spend time with delicious food and wonderful people who were creating artisanal ingredients. And kind of fast forward, some tech investments, some things went well, some things didn't go well, the usual story. But I ended up at Stanford in late 2011, and I kind of thought we had the sustainability thing under control. I thought the hippie movement had set a right kind of moniker for success for this, and I realized I was watching global ecosystems in collapse. So there was first in 2010, there was the BP oil disaster in the Gulf of Mexico, and then there was Fukushima, and I sort of had an epiphany / breakdown, which is kind of, I think, what entrepreneurs go through. Somewhere there's a fine line between the two of those things. So at Stanford, I got involved with an initiative, a competition called the Solar Decathlon, where I became the organic food and aquaponic, hydroponic coach basically for this team. And almost instantly, I realized that a smart house inside of a dumb neighborhood makes absolutely no sense. And that's when I came up with this concept, which is not my concept, by the way. It's completely Bucky's. A marriage between Buckminster Fuller, and the wonderful people who've come before in terms of organic, biodynamic permaculture, such as Rudolf Steiner. And so Regen Villages, and Regen is for regenerative, although it's a Dutch holding company that I founded as a Stanford spinoff. And the word regen, both in Dutch and German, means rain. So it's quite poetic, I think. Not so much for the Dutch and the Germans, but definitely for us in California. Next slide. So inspiration, right? So Suzanne Simard, in 1997, her dog got trapped in a hole that was from an outhouse. And they digging out this to save the dog, and they saved the dog, fortunately. They discovered something incredible. She discovered the Wood Wide Web, which is a mycorrhizal network. It's a mycelium network, which is a collaborative economy. It's actually a have-need relationship between old-growth trees and seedlings of different species in the forest. Next. Now, what's amazing about this is that these fungus inoculate themselves in a symbiotic way into the root structures, and they then allow 1,000x of water, nutrients to be conveyed to these plants and bushes and trees, etc. But also particularly interesting is that it sends a message when there are pests, because the leaves detect the saliva of the particular insect and send that message through this internet to the rest of the forest, and the rest of the forest then prepares itself. Next slide. So I'm really big on biomimetic design thinking, biomimicry. That's what the work that I've been doing at Stanford for the last 6 years now. And the concept really being that there's some really small and big thoughts around this concept of a mesh network, distributed network. So you have the neuron, you have a nerve cell, you have a cosmological simulation of dark matter, the internet, which is also a simulation. This is a satellite image of London at night. You start to see patterns. and as a developer, game developer, but also as a technologist, now realizing neighborhood development, imagine that we can create sentient, biodiverse, regenerative neighborhoods that can feed, hydrate, empower, and digest waste in a closed loop. Pretty exciting. Regen villages. Next slide. And thank you, Mark. And at the cornerstone of this really is delicious food, biodiverse, bioavailable at your doorstep that is till-free, so there's no disruption of the mycelial network, but that it overproduces, actually. On 2 acres, as you've proven as well, we can overproduce abundant surplus. But underneath, there's actually some technology. There's a substrate of where these junctions are, where the output of one system becomes the input of another. And we can learn from this. You can go back, and then the next slide, and then the next one. And then we can actually use machine learning and artificial intelligence and robotics to improve human thriving. So some people think that robots are first going to take our jobs and then kill us. And I like to think, gee, maybe we could get ahead of that curve. That would be nice. Next slide. So I'm a software guy, and we built a software stack. And that software stack looks at permaculture. It looks at how can we take a neighborhood infrastructure and improve it and use technology to benefit humanity. So it looks sort of, like a Pollock painting maybe, but the truth is that it is order. There's order in the metabolic integration, and there's order in this very elegant software that we've already been building out that connects to neighborhood infrastructure. Next slide. And imagine this, a la Bucky, again, which is that we look at sharing this data across ecosystems and climate zones, and not on arbitrary capricious lines on maps. So for instance, a neighborhood that we're building in Netherlands or in southern Sweden can talk to neighborhoods in Denmark and Norway, and they learn from each other and improve autonomously. It's the Tesla of eco-villages. I love that tagline. Next. We have a pipeline of projects, as I mentioned. We've gotten most progress in the Netherlands for our first 300 homes, we hope. We were approved for 203. We're trying to build more homes because that makes it more affordable. That also allows us to amortize our costs for regenerative infrastructure. Next slide. Resiliency in the built environment. The whole key really is that we're living in an energy positive home that is generating more power than your family needs. It's accumulating beautiful, fresh, clean water, taking waste to resource management, and feeding and empowering you with bioavailable nutrition. Next. My favorite slide. That's all, hands down. My farm-to-table experience is this. Multi-generational, multicultural, multi-socioeconomic folks coming together to break bread. The most disarming thing we can do ever is have a delicious meal together and talk. No devices, everybody's having a good time. And this, by the way, because currently my affiliation at Stanford is the School of Medicine. Somehow I snuck into the neurosurgery department. But anyway, the idea really is that we can improve healthy outcomes. That people who live like this can live to 100, 110 years old without seeing doctor, without taking pharmaceuticals. Right? You age in place. I'm aging. And the bottom line is we are not garbage as we get older. We have wisdom. We have knowledge. There's things we need to impart. Next slide. That neighborhoods and farms can go together very beautifully, but also that rows and rows of the same thing is actually not nature. That you need this kind of estuaries for migrating birds and pollinators, next slide, to bring seasonality again, the celebration of, gee, this thing was not there last year, this heirloom kind of crop. Very, very nice kind of thinking. Next slide. So again, the regenerative map of the neighborhood is a complex of essentially what people need, we think, to live a healthy, happy life. And we're not doing social engineering in this regard. We're just trying to create affordable, big A, housing that is also self-reliant for people to be happy. Next slide. So to do that, roughly 80% of our communities, 70 to 80%, are food-bearing or regenerative capable kinds of facilities. That's a long-term externality, positive externality in terms of economics. Next slide. The future of mobility is autonomous. I met with Jim Hackett, the CEO of Ford Motor Company, last year. In 8 years, Ford will no longer be selling cars to individuals or families. They will have no steering wheels, no brake pedals, or no gas pedals. And that means our neighborhoods have no garages and no driveways. So it's car-free, except for the periphery of EV. Next. So in terms of typologies, it's wood, it's Scandinavian pine, it's glass. Next slide is apartments, it's single-family homes. Next. It's townhomes, and it's semi-detached for seniors and folks with disabilities, so full services at the ground floor. And then the next is villas for the high rollers and also for co-housing. We went viral in 2016. We've had 90 million web impressions. 10,000 families have signed up to be our first residents. We've got a really good problem on our hands. So now we need to translate that into breaking the right rules with the right governments to build these neighborhoods at scale. Next. Very simple business model. Again, Buckminster Fuller, if you want to build something new, don't fight, right? Build something that makes the old model obsolete. Simply put, we are a sheep in wolf's clothing when it comes to real estate development. Next slide. We brought together incredible world-class partners, each of them contributing in kind and also some money to allow us to use their systems. By the way, all of those systems finally have open APIs, application program interfaces, for us to talk to. That allows us to actually create a sentient neighborhood infrastructure. Because we're born out of Stanford, we are imploring universities to step up and take role in making fast-track development happen around the world. Next slide. We have a great team of people. I won't go into all the CVs, but the bottom line is I'm a very strange startup because I'm a multinational corporation. We're a Dutch holding company. A president of our company is based in London. We've got folks in Amsterdam, in Sweden, in Malmo, in Copenhagen, here in Silicon Valley. And we are in the process of raising money. That's what we're doing. So Series A round, if those are interested, we'll talk about it later. Next. But here's the punchline. We put together 2 or 3 of these just even shovel-ready projects. And our plan is to raise a green bond of 3 to 5 billion euro. And then we can replicate regen villages at scale around the world. Create these lily pads of regenerative, resilient communities that are decentralized from district-scale utilities. For the first time in our life, we can actually go back to the way we used to live up until 1950 as a species, but live it in a thriving way using technology. Next slide. Ladies and gentlemen, Regen Villages.
Thanks, James.